Hey everybody, Josh Sheridan here with the Barely Legal podcast.
They demand my alter ego, but I won't go.
On today's show, we have Mike Raimondi. Am I saying that right? Raimondi? All right.
Yeah.
And he is a local musician, among other things. A bandmate of his, Dmitry Stoyanovich, who's previously been on. We talked a lot about him during our show. And if you've been in my studio, you know that I have a huge Rage Against the Machine Battle Los Angeles mural that I got from Keith Olray over at Microgroove. And it turns out that this was originally Mike Raimondi's that somehow made its way through Keith's store and now to the studio. So thank you so much for making the drive over.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Are you a Florida guy originally?
Actually, New York, born and raised. Well, born in Hawaii, but then I
Fucking A, Hawaii, then New York. That's pretty rad.
Yeah, so my dad was State Department.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so basically he was stationed in Hawaii at the time. That's when I was born.
How old of a guy are you?
I'm 40.
40, so what, 2021, so 81, so State Department in Reagan's presidency. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff going on in that regard during that presidency. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and then went to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Whereabouts in New York?
I'm from Long Island. It's called Northport. It's
Okay.
about an hour outside of the city, so it's just, quick train ride into Manhattan and whatnot.
So how old were you in Hawaii? How old were you in New York during your stays there?
I was born and lived there till 4, and then I moved to New York around 4.
Have you been back to Hawaii?
Yes, I went actually when it was my senior trip. Went over there for just hanging out vacation.
I went 3 years ago, and Hawaii's kind of like considered not a hack trick, but it's like a hack trip. But everybody's like, oh, okay, Hawaii. And so I went there. It's like, this is just going to be very kind of whatever, and it exceeded. It was the most beautiful. I loved it. We went to Kauai and we went to Maui, and it was just so amazing. And literally, like ever since then, to my wife, I was like, if we ever move anywhere, that's where I want to go, because just gorgeous. And there's a different frequency there. The people are on a different wavelength there. As not a naturalist as I am, I almost felt like this weird kind of connection with all of it. And I know that's very kind of whatever to say, but I mean,
I get it.
It filled me up with some kind of energy that you don't get stateside. And as much as it's, a state, it's not the US, it's something else entirely. So I really dug it. And definitely we went with my daughter when she was about 3 going on 4. My son just turned 3. I'd like in the next 2 years to bring him there because she took to it. So, she was swimming in the Molokini Crater, and we rode to Hana. We did all that stuff. It was badass.
Yeah.
So then how long did you stay in Long Island?
I was there till about, I was 21.
So formative years.
Mm-hmm.
How was growing up in New York?
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously from a music standpoint, being around Manhattan, I mean, just every band came through. So I never really had to, I had to pick and choose which shows.
Right. You almost couldn't do it all. There's too much to choose from.
Exactly. So,
now were you like a New York kid? Were you, going to clubs and doing all the shit, or were you suburbs and just kind of came in as needed, or how was that?
Mix of both, really. I would go into the city with my buds, and we would just hit up like the record shops and go buy at that time buying like bootleg CDs, that kind of stuff.
Did you go to any of the shows at like CBGB or any of those types of, or was that pretty much dying down by that point?
So the bummer for me is actually I never went to CB's. I wanted to. I mean, that was obviously on the list, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, just never got to that venue. I mean, I went to tons of venues, Roseland.
Was Max's Kansas City already shut down by the time you were seeing music, or?
That one doesn't sound familiar to me. So I'm assuming.
CB's and Max's are kind of the historically two competing places that you'd play.
Yeah.
CB's had, I think by the time I started visiting New York, it had already turned into like, they just were selling shirts and shit there.
Yeah. Exactly.
But there's a, I don't know if there's a great brunch place like a block away from there.
Okay.
But then Catty Corner, there's a store, and it had every metal shirt, no demand, like the most random fucking weird, like Japanese death metal bands. You could find their t-shirts there. So every time I went to New York, I'd make a point of going to that store and buying that stuff.
That's awesome.
So, Raimondi's Italian.
Yep.
Do you know what part of Italy is it?
Calabria. Actually, I went back in 2015. I still have family there.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it was an amazing trip. I mean, southern Italy, it's kind of by the toe of the boot, right across from Sicily.
Yeah, I think that's where Tony Soprano's family in the show was supposed. And I only know that because I never watched Sopranos when it aired, and I'm watching it right now.
Yeah.
And there's just an episode like in season 1 or 2 where Tony goes to meet with like the mirror of his family here, and I think it was Calabria.
It could have been. I've watched that show. I love that show, but I can't remember exactly where he was from. But it's such a classic. I mean, I've watched it like 3 times through. Again.
I'm enjoying it. It hasn't aged well from a like music and fashion and all that perspective, but still, it's still Christopher's Paulie, all these people are pretty badass. My wife's family they're from Sicily, so I get to hear. The Italy talk all the time. Yeah. Now, only child, siblings?
So I have a couple half siblings.
Okay.
So basically I was an only child growing up.
They older or younger?
So I have older. I have an interesting family scenario. Okay. So I have an older brother who's 48 and I have a younger brother who's 10.
Okay. So, wow. So
yeah, my dad's been remarried a few times.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, I've got little brother, which is awesome. I'm a big hockey fan, and
who are your teams?
Well, it's the Bolts and the Rangers, but I've kind of switched over to the Bolts because some of my favorite players got traded from the Rangers, and naturally, I live here. I don't get to see the Rangers play as much, and I love to go to games. So,
am I confusing the Rays and the Bolts? I know the Rays got like Snell or whatever, but didn't the Bolts just get rid of like a big player from? They made some big trades, or there's something I vaguely recall. Am I misremembering?
So as far as big players, I mean, Gord's gone. I would have liked to.
Gord,
I would have liked to have kept him around, but because he reminded me a lot of one of my favorite players, Callahan, who recently retired, and it would have been nice to have him around because he's got a lot of grit on the ice, kind of thing.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's funny. My wife is kind of the jock of the family. So she is avid with the Bolts. And so and she's friends with, is it McDonough, Ryan McDonough?
Yeah.
Kind of friendly
with him a couple times.
Friendly. Well, not with him, with it. She and his wife do like eye stroll together or something like that. But so I kind of through osmosis am a Bolts fan through her.
That's cool.
Where did music enter your life? Was it something that was in the house growing up? Is it something that just through your friends? How did that kind of find its way in?
So I'd say it was like 85, pretty distinct. My uncle had this dream of opening up a record shop.
Oh, wow.
And so he opened his record shop up in 86, RPM Sound. It's in Huntington, New York. And, from that moment on, kind of he was a real influence on me musically. And it's kind of funny. I was really into dance music, like Mars, that Pump Up the Volume song.
Sure, yeah.
I had that on, little 7-inch, played on my little Fisher Price.
Sure.
And
I had Rob Bass and Public Enemy. That was for sure.
So that's where I got my start, was like dance music, that kind of stuff.
Especially in New York, that was such a big part of living up there. I mean, you couldn't live up there and not have that part of your daily fabric.
For sure.
What was did he have like a certain type of music that he loved, or was he just kind of loved everything? And that's.
So dance was huge.
Sure.
And he was the biggest Madonna fan you could
I love Madonna too. Yeah.
Same here, man. Yes. I have much respect for her. So, as a result of growing up with him, he was like I said, huge influence, and has some great stories of like dancing with her in clubs and stuff in New York. But
again, at that same time, you got like the Beastie Boys, you got the Cro-Mags, you got Agnostic Front, you got, Bad Brains making visits over there. There's a whole New York hardcore scene that's going on right around that time too.
Totally.
And then you have, like the new wave, post-rock, Talking Head, all that kind of stuff that's so ubiquitous in New York and known for that area. So such a great crossroads of all these amazing types of music.
Totally.
So he opened that place up, and how close was that to you? Like, did you hang out there after school every day, or?
Like summers, I spent a lot there. I actually started working there when I was in middle school. And
oh, really?
Yeah, that was like the best experience. Like
I can only imagine.
Yeah, that was the dream job.
If I ever hit the lottery, I'm gonna go work with Keith or go work with Rob over in St. Pete or whatever.
Totally, man. It's a blast. You just get to meet all the good music people.
You just talk it all day.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't tell Elliot just started here 2 weeks ago, and like he can barely get shit done because all day long I'm like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. He's a big vinyl person.
Nice.
So anyway, do you remember working there and being around there? Like, kind of what popped up on your radar as far as bands or albums or anything like that? It was kind of big in your life.
So for me then, it was all about the Chili Peppers and Nirvana. I was a big, like, that changed my life. When I turned 11 and Nevermind came out, and so did Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Those are pivotal moments in
Blood
my
Sugar
life.
is one of my top 5.
Oh,
all time.
totally.
Yeah.
John Frusciante is one of my favorite guitar players.
Well, not 100% agree with you. And I was just having this conversation with, I'm drawing a blank who I was just talking to last week, but the end of Sir Psycho Sexy, that guitar part at the end, that's like my favorite guitar part ever. Like I've
really
tried
cool and
to,
funky.
just the circular kind of whatever.
Yep.
But the thing about that album for me, I got into him, the album just before that, Mother's Milk, but with Blood Sugars, I think they were at the peak of their drug use for one, but like they held up in like a haunted house, and I think Rick Rubin produced it, and they were all just kind of zenning out and kind of getting off on this different plane. And so that song, that album for me just kind of, they've had a lot of great albums, but that one transcended for me as kind of like, I'm not a drug user, but you hear people talk about, psychedelics and these other things kind of putting them just in this other pathway. And I think that's where they kind of really, were at the peak of their power. So that album for me. And then of course Nirvana, I mean, you can't argue that album, but, so that's what, 89, 90 kind of.
So for me, it was 91.
Yeah.
And that just changed my life. Prior to that, I was really listening to still dance music, like CNC Music Factory. I was big into breakdancing. Like I learned that from my uncle and stuff like that. Now, if I try and get on the floor, it's kind of bad. Man. I'm like, it's pretty rough. So I don't do that anymore. But
when did you pick up an instrument?
So it was about that same time.
Was it bass to begin with, or did you matriculate to bass?
Yeah, I actually started on guitar first. And then basically I just, I was learning power chords. It was funny. I mean, my teacher was awesome. So, I think everyone says that. Like, your first teacher was probably one of the best guitarists you knew.
Right.
And so he was amazing, this guy Steve. And I remember, him trying to teach me theory and stuff like that. And me being a blockhead kid, I was just kind of like, oh, just teach me the power chords, man. How do I play this song, this Nirvana song? Which were fortunately pretty easy considering if you knew how to play, you could figure it out. So, I just, plucking away on that. And then eventually, this is, years later, I realized there was bigger need for bass players. Guitarists were a dime a dozen.
I say it all the time. Drummers and bass players are the utility players of the music world. You can always find a job because everybody needs you.
Exactly. So I figured, you know what? I really enjoy bass. And that was, I think that was another thing for me as far as with rock music. Blood Sugar Sex Magic really is when I started to discern guitar and bass. Yeah. Before it all just kind of sounded like one wavelength.
Oh, for sure.
And then that record really kind of taught me, I can hear the bass. I hear the difference between, that
it's Flea. They're going to put that up front. They're not going to hide that in the back. But
exactly. Yeah. So that really influenced me to, kind of pick up the bass. I was never a slap guy. That wasn't my thing. That
had its moment, with Les Claypool and Flea, of course, and some of the other, like, I think Suicidal Tendencies, at least at the time, there was kind of that type of playing, but I don't know in music of the last 10, 20 years, I can't think of a lot of people who play like that in the rock world. Obviously in funk and R&B, there's more of that type of thing, but that kind of had its minute. Nothing against it. It's amazing. I mean, I love Flea and I love Les Claypool, but it's not the norm per se. Yeah. Who are some of your other bass guys? Did you kind of start following them more closely as you got into it?
I did. And my next big hero is John Entwistle of The Who.
For sure.
He just revolutionized the instrument, in my opinion. And as much as he's a huge influence on me, I'll never be at that level, and that's okay. I just want to play and have a good time. But what he's done with the bass guitar is just mind blowing to me.
How did you find transitioning from guitar to bass? Was it just? I mean, you kind of already had the tools you needed, or was it doing a whole different thing for you? Or
had the tools I needed, especially growing up on stuff like Nirvana, and then gravitating towards punk. Understanding power chords, and then understanding how that translate. Top 4 strings of a bass are the top 4 strings of a guitar. So it was pretty easy to kind of transition. It was just a matter of understanding, following the kick drum a little bit, just to kind of which was a little bit different from guitar. But I was able to transition pretty well.
So did you ever get into Mike Watt or Lemmy or any of those guys?
Of course.
Mike Watt's
love
like
Mike
my,
Watt.
my favorite, and not only as a bass player, but he's kind of like this weird kind of like Mark Twain musician guy that kind of lives in his own world again. I always like these kind of misfit people who never have fully like assimilated into the world. They kind of are on their own speed.
Yep, I can relate.
So, so as far as when you're joining bands, when does that start happening?
So unfortunately, I was a late bloomer as far as that happened. It was actually college.
Where'd you go?
So I started in Connecticut, University of Hartford, and then I realized, what the fuck am I doing here in this cold weather still? Like, get me out of here.
Right.
So my brother at the time, he had just moved to Tallahassee.
This is the older brother.
Yeah, my older brother. He just moved to Tallahassee, and he was like, hey, if you're done with being up north, come down here, man. It's great, And so I gave it a whirl, even though Tallahassee is very different from New York, Connecticut. It's a total different spot. But I just needed a change at that point. And I was 21 at the time, and I decided to transfer to Florida State University. And that was a pivotal moment in my life because that's when I did first join my a band.
Well, there's such a strong, I've toyed with this, and again, I don't, as you'll tell me what bands you've been in, I don't, I don't know your full history, but there's been such a strong punk and hardcore scene up in the Panhandle, Gainesville, area, and they've got that Fest show and Against Me and Hot Water Music, and there's just this whole kind of North Florida scene. Now, what my question to you is did that translate to Tallahassee from Gainesville? Because I know Gainesville is very much a center of that sort of thing. Was it similar in Tallahassee?
100%. But I would say around the time that I was in my first band, it was called The Avenue, with a bunch of good buddies of mine, one of which, Brian Steele, who actually was in the Tampa scene as well. And I later joined a band with him again here called Macramé Owls, which was very short-lived. But so in Tallahassee, it was very much the scene, emo, if you will. I know
what year-ish are we looking?
So it's like 2002 to like 2003.
So emo new metal scene is what's on the radio or what's
totally.
Yeah.
And so we had this band, and we had some great shows. I mean, we opened for Fall Out Boy on their first tour.
Oh wow,
which was kind of unique. Yeah. That was when actually I enjoyed Fall Out Boy. I'm not a real fan of much of their newer stuff.
I don't know what they've done in the past however many years, but I mean, they were big. They were a big band.
Exactly. But I always joke. I mean, my friends and I, we owned a T-shirt company.
Oh, really?
It's called Divvies, and we sponsored bands. We had a connect. The owner was Jordan from Newfound Glory's cousin. Okay. So he would get us tons of band connections and whatnot. And so one of them was Fall Out Boy, actually, because they hit us up, the company. They actually were like, hey, here's our demo. They gave us the first 3 songs off their first record that hadn't been released yet. And they said, we'd love to be sponsored by you guys, which I think is awesome because you think of that band, you look at how big they got, you think, were they just a fucking machine band that like they were assembled by a record label?
Right.
And they weren't, they really did start from down in the same level as my bands did back then, so.
Well, it's funny because and I'd be interested in your opinion on this. Some people, there's kind of a fork in the road that I perceive with bands where they decide whether they're going to be commercial darlings or not,
totally.
And so some people kind of make a hard right and every song is a pop song, no matter what instruments, what the thing is. And other people sometimes almost seem to be intentionally trying to not have fans. Yeah. And it's the bands that can kind of modulate between those two that I always find interesting, that like don't hate their fans, but have the integrity and aren't always trying to like me. So it's
exactly,
it's a weird thing, but pop music, you go back to the Beatles and you mentioned playing, bass for Nirvana or guitar for Nirvana, and same with Ramones and some of these other bands. I mean, really, it's like 3 chords and a smile. Like it's just this,
exactly.
There is a thing that just appeals to people, and you can kind of push that button a bunch and kind of, I'm not saying it's quite that easy, but it's interesting. Totally. So the first band was Macramé Owls.
So the first band was The Avenue.
Okay.
And then I later, with the same lead singer from that band, we formed Macramé Owls here in Tampa. And that was like 2012, 2013.
What kind of music was Avenue? What kind of music was Macramé Owls?
So Macramé Owls, it was that scene emo, even though emo, was described very differently from the 90s, but in the early 2000s, that's kind of what people said emo was. But I don't think that necessarily defined that genre. But,
right.
So we were kind of more emo, and then the Macramé Owls stuff is a little more indie. It's hard to put a label on that.
Influences? Really. Anybody that I would...
I mean, it's funny. I think my lead singer would probably differ on mine.
Yeah, what he thought and what you thought.
Yeah, but I would say like, Death Cab type.
Sure, yeah.
That kind of, that kind of stuff.
And how long did that band go on for?
That was about 3 years.
Okay.
Roughly.
No albums for that band?
We have a couple EPs.
Do you?
Yeah.
Are those on streaming anywhere?
They were on Spotify, have since been taken down.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't me that put them up there. It was my, the lead singer of the band decided to throw them up, and then I guess decided he didn't want to pay for it anymore. So
you got to pay to keep it up there.
So yeah, for Spotify. Yeah. Especially if you're not really making money.
Interesting.
So.
You have to let me know about that, because I've become a big proponent here locally of getting people's bands. Yeah. I had this running debate on Spotify that if your band makes over X, it's a horrible business model. If your band makes under X, it's a great business model, because what I found is the easiest way to share local music is with Spotify. I mean, Bandcamp is harder to navigate, and then you can do the YouTube thing, but it's always just clunky. Like you got to have your phone, unless you know how to do it on YouTube to listen to it. And it's
exactly.
So Spotify is just always so, my buddy Greg, who's in Wolfface, his first band Next Season from Clearwater, we just got all their stuff up there, and then Elliot's first band Escapist, we put it up there. So nice. I'm always searching for local bands who have stuff who don't have it on Spotify to get it on there. So we'll have to discuss that later. Yeah. Anyway, so Macramé Owls, and then where'd you go from there?
So there was actually a lot of bands in between the Avenue and Macramé Owls. And one of the ones you brought up, actually, is a good transition, was you were comparing Tally to Gainesville. And I joined like a crust punk band called In the Wake Of. This was about 2003, roughly. Okay. And we actually opened for Against Me and another band called Smoke or Fire, who were previously called Jericho, another really good hardcore band. And that band, man, that changed my life too, because that kind of Against Me type vibe was something that was new to me at that point. Yeah. And I just started really focusing on kind of hardcore punk, like that kind of vibe. Right. At that point.
What about live music? Like during that period, what are some of the shows that stand out to you, either that you went to or that you played in? Or I always like to collect people's like best shows,
So I'm gonna kind of jump all around, because I've been to a million shows as far as timeline's concerned.
I usually do first and best, but I don't want to limit it to first and best, because sometimes there's other ones that are worth talking about.
Totally, I get, I'll go with first though, just to tell you, because it was such an experience for me. Was the Chili Peppers with Silverchair and the Rentals, which that was my college years. I remember all three of those being on MTV daily. Yeah. And I mean, three very different bands. It was really cool to see the Rentals, because I mean, they didn't really play that often.
Was that the guy that was in Weezer?
Yes. Yeah. So that was interesting. They didn't tour that much either, so it was kind of cool. And they actually just released a record that's, in my opinion, pretty good. I really enjoyed that.
Well, it's funny, because when that guy left is when Weezer started to kind of suck wind too a little bit. So I don't know how much of Weezer's, legitimacy was based on his involvement, because at a certain point, they kind of went off in a weird direction. But anyway, so where was that? Was that up in New York? Or?
Yeah, that was in New York. And actually, if you ever read Anthony Kiedis' bio, he actually talks about that show, because it was in February of 96, I think.
Was that Californication? No, that was By the Way.
No. It was actually Navarro's years. So 96.
96. I'm thinking 2006. I'm thinking 2006. Okay.
So he actually wrote about that, because there was a huge blizzard, and I'll never forget this, because the show was actually already delayed. It was supposed to be in 1995, and then their drummer broke his arm in a motorcycle accident, and I was already pissed. It's supposed to be my first show, and I'm like, God damn, now I'm gonna.
Is that Chad Smith?
Yeah. And so I was bummed that that wasn't gonna happen, and then this snowstorm hits. It's in February in New York, and the show was still on. So I convinced my mom. I'm like, Mom, I'm going to this freaking show.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not gonna not hit the show. And he ended up writing about that in his book, because I'm sure it was.
I had that book in my office, and
nice.
That's one of like 10 music biographies that I'm halfway through.
Yeah.
What you're describing is my story with Tool and Metallica. Like I've literally held tickets to like 3 different shows with both of them.
Yeah.
at Tom Petty as well. And all three of them, for whatever reason, I had to like give my tickets away, or I couldn't make it, or it got canceled or whatever. I mean, there was a lot last year, 2020. There was Tool, Guns N' Roses, the Stones were all supposed to come to Tampa, and all those fucking got canceled. It was pretty gnarly.
I had the GNR tickets too, man. I was bummed that got canceled. I'd never seen them. So.
I saw them in Orlando, during this newest incarnation, and if you can suspend your originalist desires and just kind of enjoy what you're watching, it was pretty rad. And not to mention, one of my favorite bands growing up too, the Cult opened for him.
Oh, nice.
And I love the Cult, man. Sonic Temple was one of my favorite albums, and then Electric and all that other stuff. But love that band. Anyway, okay, so that was first. Yeah.
So then some of my favorite shows I've seen. I got to see John Frusciante play a solo show, which was
his solo music is fucking the shit. I love it.
Completely agree, man. I'm a big vinyl collector, so I'm slowly collecting his stuff.
Really?
It's so expensive though, so trying to.
I don't have any of that, but I would definitely be down for that.
Yeah, it's great, and to see him was really cool because he never really played any full tours. Like he would go to New York, LA, the big markets, and
was this before or after he got really bad with heroin?
So this was 2001. So this was after he'd already been in the Chili Peppers again, and then he was good to go. And then he wrote that first record, To Record Only Water, 10 Days, which I think is just a great record as well.
They're all great. Yeah. They're all great. I mean, for me, the best part of the Chili Peppers is Frusciante. Most of the music, like if I were to pick my 10 favorite songs, they'd be ones that he's singing. You can hear him singing back up on a lot. And then usually he's got a pretty badass, solo on there. I mean, not to take anything away from Navarro or Josh, whatever the hell, Klingenhofer or whatever. Yeah. But for me, unless it's him, it's not the real full deal.
Agree.
I mean, I dig it all. I mean, I didn't mind the last two albums. Yeah. They're fine, but it's Frusciante Chili Peppers where it's at. So where'd you see him?
So that was at the Angel Orange Sounds Foundation in New York. It was like an old church.
Like a small capacity type deal?
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing. This is back in the day when I tried to get those tickets. Unfortunately, I mean, they sold out like that. It was like that scenario. It wasn't online. You had to go literally wait in line. Yeah. And so unfortunately I didn't get them, but then I hit up my uncle who was still in the record biz at that point. His store was about to go under because of obviously at that point, 2001, that was Napster, the height of it, all that stuff. So I hit him up. I'm like, hey, can you maybe call your Warner rep and see if you can get me in the show? And he was like, yeah, no problem. Got me in the show. Which I was fortunate because, I mean, literally, I remember staring. I was in the balcony area for the show. And it was, general admission. And I'm looking down. I'm like, they did not sell any tickets for this show. Like, I feel like it's like halfway full. I couldn't believe it. And I'm like, so why did it sell out so fast? Obviously, I don't know, something was up. He didn't want that many people there or whatever it was.
Well, he's a different guy. I don't think he does it for money or fame. He does it because he's got an itch he needs to scratch. And
totally.
So now he's in this electronic music deal. And I think he just put out a new single or album or something.
Yeah. And I picked that up too. It's unique.
It's not Backspacer. It's what's it, Square Pusher or something like. He's got
his other moniker.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on it, but I think it was Trick Finger actually. Was
something like that. Yeah. So was that just him by himself, or did he have anybody with him?
Yeah, it was just literally he was the only person that played. And that was enough for me. It was awesome to see that.
Was it transcendent? Like, there's these people that it almost becomes a religious experience watching them play live. Like, I had tickets to go see Sufjan Stevens in Orlando. Nice. I didn't get to see it, but every time I watch him, it almost seems like you're looking through the looking glass into some other world. And then, obviously like Elliott Smith, I saw Iron and Wine at Tampa Theater. He was pretty great. But the one that was most that way, you can just throw them wherever. There's a can behind you, by the way, if you want to toss it out. We're imbibing here in the studio. Don't worry, but just set it on the table. That's fine. So the one that was most that way for me is I saw Neutral Milk Hotel over at Ruth Eckerd Hall, and they played in the Airplane Over the Sea. They played it front to back.
That's
just
amazing.
play that, and I mean they're breaking out fucking like band saws and like washboards, and I've always been somewhat have an aversion to the Mumford and like the fake folk kind of fake Americana like.
Yeah.
type of deal. But they were 10 years or so before all those bands. But seeing that, like, we were all looking at each other like, what the fuck's going on here? Like, It was eerie. So very cool. Any other big ticket bands that you saw?
The other one was
not bands, but shows that register on your.
Jane's Addiction was one of my favorite shows I ever went to. I mean, it was 1997, right when they had reunited, but unfortunately Eric Avery wasn't part of it, who was another very influential bass player for me. But Flea stepped in, so I was accepting. It was kind of cool to see him play, with Jane's and whatnot. And it was the night before Halloween. I mean, I distinctly remember that. I mean, I was a little too young to be drinking whiskey, but I decided to hit the bottle that night, and it was well worth it.
You got the right potion. You got the right mix of alcohol in your system and experience.
Oh yeah, it was a great time, man. And I just remember some fun stories from that show. I was in the pit and just going crazy, obviously, and my shoe was kicked off of my foot. And I was like, oh shit, I was like,
I'm never getting that back.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going to be walking, to the train, with one shoe on. That's all right. I guess I'll do it,
Yeah.
And then after the song was over, someone was literally waving my shoe in the crowd.
Oh, you got it back.
Yeah. I was like, this is amazing. I was like, at that point on, I was like, oh, this is a good crowd,
I want to start a segment called Pit Stories. I went to, when I saw Slayer and their farewell tour at the amphitheater, and there's a guy in a wheelchair, and the crowd put the guy in his wheelchair up over the crowd, and we're passing him around the wheelchair. I thought that was pretty bad. Yeah. My favorite pit story, though, is Dave Decker up in Gainesville at Fugazi. Yeah. Have you heard the story?
I haven't heard it.
There's a video on YouTube of it. He gets bashed in the face, and it's just pouring blood, and Joe Lally from Fugazi gives him his shirt, and Dave sops up the blood on his face with Joe Lally's shirt. And after the show, as he's leaving, Joe Lally comes up to him and says, we're on tour. I didn't bring a lot of clothes. Do you mind if I get that shirt back? And so Dave's like, sure. And gave him back his shirt, just drenched in his blood. And I was amazing. Like, that's rad on. So, but literally there's a video of it where you can kind of see part of that go down. So,
yeah.
And then just to go see Fugazi. Did you ever see Fugazi?
No.
I've got a few friends who've seen him, and that's like my bucket list that I'll never be able to fulfill unless they decide to get back together.
Exactly.
Anyway, so let's go from the earlier bands to how we start making in more your present incarnations. Obviously, you were nice enough to bring an Empire Cinema pressing in today.
Yeah.
Was that kind of the next big band after the?
Let's see. So time.
What are you in right now?
So right now I'm in High Beam,
okay.
But I mean we're on indefinite hiatus until things kind of clear up.
Okay,
so,
you're not in the Fast Talkers too with
no.
So you're High Beam, okay.
Yep.
And then was that what came right after Empire Cinema?
Yeah.
Okay, exactly. So when did Empire Cinema start?
So Empire Cinema started. It was well before I was in the band.
Okay.
I want to say I'm Brendan's gonna kick my ass. Probably like 2010, 11, somewhere in that range. And then I ended up joining the band. I think it was 13, 14, somewhere in that,
How'd you get tapped for that? Was that something you sought out or something they asked you about? Or
So it was actually, I was a fan because we actually played some shows with Mac Owls. That was the time when I was in Macramé Owls, and we played some shows together, and I enjoyed the music, and we ended up just hanging out, Brendan and I, every once in a while. And then I remember just chilling out with him, and I was actually starting to play keyboard. And
really?
I was gonna, see if we were gonna maybe have me jump in on keyboard. That never worked. And then their bassist ended up saying she was gonna leave. So at that point, Brendan was like, "Hey man, you want to play bass?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" So I jumped in on that.
So are you on any of the albums since you came on?
So for Empire, I'm on that record.
Okay.
And that's the only thing we recorded, while I was in the band. That was a long time coming, that record. We recorded it over here at Atomic with with Frank.
Did you write any of it?
So that record, I wrote some of my bass lines, but some of it was actually, from the previous bass
sketches
players
that had kind of started.
Yeah, and I just kind of jumped on top of that. So the thing with writing for me didn't really come till a little bit later when I joined High Beam, when I decided I'd left Empire and I decided, you know what, I want to play guitar again. It's been freaking years. I'd never been a guitarist in a band.
Sure.
So I said, I'm just going to start writing some songs. And I started writing my own stuff, and that became High Beam. So
writing, where do you start at? Do you start with lyrics? Do you start with the guitar? Do you start, how is it that you start with the harmonies or the words, or how does that go?
Definitely not the words. I can't sing for shit. So,
you're not Michael Anthony or.
No. So for me, it was all about a lot of times just noodle around,
Yeah.
trying to figure out something lick wise, and then if that comes into a song, cool. And
Aside from Frusciante, who are some of your guitar guys?
Guitar guys, that's a good question. As lame as this sounds, like he's like really like my, as far as guitar, I have a ton of bass. You want to talk bass players?
I do want to talk bass, but I have my two main ones that I love are Josh Homme and John Frusciante.
Okay.
Homme's got this very kind of, and I heard him explain it best as a cabaret style that he plays. Like his solos and his chord progressions and everything always just have this very kind of dark, old timey cabaret feel to them. You know, the Queens of the Stone Age had this very, well, their last album, they got a little bit more dancey with Mark Ronson doing this stuff. But before that, there's always this very kind of dark, sinister take on it. So
totally. I love that.
And then, you know, where Homme's kind of the devil, Frusciante's kind of the angel to me. You know, they kind of on both sides of it. So you mentioned some other, you mentioned Entwistle, we talked Flea, we talked, who else bass wise?
I mean, Lally, you brought up earlier, was a huge influence on me. And the cool thing is my wife gave me one of the best Father's Day gifts this past year. He started hitting people up, and actually Keith early told me about this. He was like, hey, you know, check it out. Joe's giving lessons.
Yes.
Yeah. Via Skype, whatever, you know. And I was like, oh, nice. So told my wife, and then, so that's what she got me.
Did you do it already?
Oh yeah, I did it. I think it was like June or whatever it was. Yeah. And it was a blast.
How was it? How was he?
Oh, he's as nice as you can imagine. I mean, similar to the story that you told, you know, giving his shirt so this, you know, Dave could wipe the blood off his face. You know,
but they're like the Mount Rushmore of a certain type of music. Like they almost don't seem of this world. Although Ian MacKaye can't not be in a documentary anymore. But the rest of them, like, is it Guy or Guy? Like he's been kind of popping up a little bit more. I've heard him on some podcasts. There's that rag that Keith has at the front door at Microgroove, and he's in the in that. But and then obviously with like there's a couple different bands that they've. Ian just has it. Koricki, and then what's the other one? The instrumental one. Mess Aesthetics or something like that. Yeah. So they're kind of, you know, I was hoping, especially with like this last 4 years politically speaking, I was like, God, if there's ever a time for a Fugazi reunion tour, it would be now. But that's so not what they would do ever. So I guess it's just kind of,
we can just dream.
Yeah, the way it was. It's funny that your story about Joe Lally. I have pick up these little stories. So my buddy Greg from Wolfface, his wife, tried to get him studio time with Steve Albini, and he was like, it's probably better if that doesn't happen because I love Steve Albini, and you don't hear good stories about him working on records. And then another buddy of mine got. Who's the lead singer for the Hold? Are you like the Hold Steady at all?
I'm not a huge fan.
You're familiar with them?
I'm familiar with the band. Yeah.
A friend of mine's wife got him something with them, and then the best story of this is I think it was my birthday in 2019. My wife actually reached out to Bruce Springsteen's manager to see if he would come on the show. And I was like, babe, he would never. But what was great is they had like an email not Springsteen as person, but like they responded to her in a timely fashion and repeatedly. Yeah. And I was like, that's almost better than him coming on, because I would have just shit myself and like would have just done the worst interview ever. But I was like, the fact that you got his manager to email with you several times was just, that in and of itself, I think was bad. I want to frame those emails. That's I love when wives kind of, you know,
step up and
they don't know enough to be nervous about what they're asking to do. Like they'll kind of go the extra mile. But
totally.
So when did you get married?
It was 2017.
Okay. You have kids?
Yeah. I have one little baby girl. Brie.
Oh, yeah. How old is she?
She's 1.5.
Little girls are they're the fun. I have two. Yeah. My daughter Stella will be 7 next month. But that was such that caught me so off guard. Like, I'm not one of these guys who like needed a son. You know, a lot of new dads, they want a son because they want to play football and do all this bullshit. I really didn't care.
Same here. Yeah.
But when we had my daughter, man, it was just like, you know, the peak of your love for your wife or whatever. For this little girl, and it's different, but it's weird. It's this weird thing. And now she's like, I always joke, I get nagging in stereo. Like both of them are on my ass about everything. And now I got my son who's, you know, it's like we're picking sides, but I you know, having a little girl really changed me. I think I was a progressive guy beforehand. I was not a chauvinist. I was very kind of aware of that stuff. But as much as I was aware of it, even more so once I had a little girl.
Yeah.
Was that your experience?
Oh, 100%.
How did it change your life as far as music? You know, not getting to practice as much, not getting to play as much, not getting to. Was that
No, it actually wasn't a thing because my wife's awesome. I mean, she literally.
That is awesome. I was going to ask you about that.
She literally gave me my time. You know, we have, you know, the baby's up until 8 o'clock at night, you know. So after 8 o'clock, I mean, if we're not doing anything, you know, she's open to giving me my own time. So, you know, that's when I would have practices typically, you know, is when the baby's asleep. Yeah. So I was still able to make it work. She understood how important it was a part of my life.
So Scott Miller, who I was blanking on a minute ago, he's who came in last week. Do you know Scott?
I'm not familiar now.
So he's the drummer in the Holy Terror. He's in this band Rototiller. He's in this band Genghis Flan. Like there's this whole Seminole Heights scene of a little bit older musicians who are like this consortium, and they're all in like 20 bands with each other. But the history of awesome wives supporting it's usually wives, just because that's I'm sure there's a awesome husband crew as well. But you know, that's so huge, like that, you know, because and what Scott was saying, and maybe you'll agree, is they know what not having that outlet would look like. And so it is a mutual benefit to kind of let you scratch that itch. And, you know, so tell me about High Beam a little bit. What was the inspiration there? Was there an idea in mind when that was started as far as type of music, type of sound?
So I go back to my, you know, where I started in 1980. And at the time I didn't know how influential that time period would be on who I am today musically. I'd say some of my favorite bands were to come out of that time. Joy Division, you know, you name it. I mean, some of the greatest post-punk. I'm a big fan of early REM, early U2, you know. But it's really crazy. Since I joined Empire Cinema and then left and then joined High Beam, during that transition, I really just started to really dig deep and find some really old school bands from that time that were really into the post-punk stuff. Because
hit me up. This is part of my Trojan horse deal here is I get to learn about shit from people. So what I'll do,
I'm blanking on names. I'm the worst with names. But the cool thing is,
message me later when they all hit you. They'll hit you on the ride home, and then you just message.
Totally. But I've got Spotify and I've got playlists with stuff all over the place, so I can send you some stuff. But so that really it started because I started listening to this band. They're called Shame from the UK.
Okay.
And that post-punk vibe that they had, it was a newer version. You know, Gang of Four, very style. That was kind of what they were going for, but it had a little more of a unique new sound to it. But you know, the purists will say they just ripped off, you know, Gang of Four or whatever. But that really influenced me a lot in what I was writing when I heard their new album. And so then, like I said, that started the rabbit hole. I just went down and just started going back to the old post-punk stuff. Another big influence, and fortunately High Beam got to play with them, was the Chameleons. And it was Chameleons Vox, I guess, is the adaptation. It's just the same. And the rest of the band is, you know, paid.
There was just an article recently on Gang of Four and how much they influenced like the Chili Peppers and how much they influenced or were kind of similar sound, that angular guitar like Minutemen, and you know, there's kind of tracked the lineage of that type of sound from them to present. And it's true, it is kind of its own thing. You know, angular guitar. I can't think of a better way to.
No, that's it. That's it. Spot on.
So, and how did you put the band together? Did you have people in mind, or was it just whoever was available? Or
I was hanging out with the bass player for a number of bands, Jared, and then also the keyboard player, Ariel Cortez.
Yeah.
He was actually, you know, wanting to start a new band and whatnot, and get back to playing keys, because he had also jumped from keys to keyboard, and I'm sorry, not keys to keyboard, keys to bass.
Yeah.
And so then he was wanting to get back and play some keys again. So, you know, we were just jamming, the three of us, and then, you know, then we involved Dimitri, because we obviously,
who I love.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
I think he's a stud, man.
Yeah. So we jumped on that, and then we were just playing as a 4-piece at that point. You know? And then eventually we got another bass player, which was the ironic part too that we talk about all the time is we're a band full of bass players other than Dimitri. You know, Ariel's a bass player, I'm a bass player, Jared's a bass player, and Ed is a bass player.
But I think that's badass because
Yeah.
I think your instrument, you know, affects how you listen to music, affects, you know, like I was talking with Scott Miller last week, you know,
Yeah.
he's a drummer originally. And so
Yeah.
that's what he's hearing, you know, and it's funny because, you know, bass is kind of the last instrument that people understand in my, like, I think if I asked my wife not my wife, but that's a bad example. But if you ask most people on the street, very few of them know what that is or what that does. It's even funny if you ever watch the documentary We Jam Econo with Mike Watt. He talks about how when they started the Minutemen, they just thought the bass was a guitar with 4 strings, and you hear Flea tell a story about they didn't know that you actually tuned a guitar to a set series of notes. They thought it was just like some people like to play loose strings, some people like to play tight strings, and so it was like I like my strings loose, and that's how they did. I always think that's a funny story, but you know, I don't think people realize what the bass is, and then from there, like the importance of bass and kind of the different things that it can do. And coming up as a Metallica kid, you know, Injustice for All was always a big bass discussion. Even to this day, is still the bass because effectively, when Cliff Burton died, another bass hero, at least for me, you know, when he passed, that was the first album that he recorded on. And I don't know if they wrote the parts so that they just went right along with the guitar, or when they mixed it, they just didn't even put it on the mix, but you can barely hear it. But now when you're listening to music, I always find more interesting when the bass is doing something different. You know, it's not just holding down the you know, the low notes. And so, you know, I got really into bands like Dillinger Escape Plan and Converge and a lot of these kind of, whatever you want to call them, like newer hardcore or math rock or whatever, where, I mean, it's almost like every member is playing a different song at once. And so I always think that's pretty rad when you can almost listen to a song 4 times and listen to each part of it on its own. And it's just, I wish like Spotify and some of these other things made it so that you could turn down vocals or turn down guitar or turn down drum and just listen to that one part. I would do that all day long if you could do that. I mean, it would really help with learning how to play these songs. But anyway, so High Beam, how do they have out? What's the situation with albums, recordings, EPs, LPs, that sort of thing?
So we recorded at the studio with actually the bass player from Wolfface, Dan.
Over Rock Garden.
Yeah. And so we recorded our first EP.
He's awesome
there.
too. I love him.
Oh, such a good dude.
Yeah.
And easy to work with. And I love the vibe of his studio because it reminded me.
Is this the new one or the old one? Is this the one he's currently got, or is this the?
So this was about 2 years ago.
That's probably the new one.
The new one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just like the vibe because it reminded me actually of I recorded at the same studio that Against Me recorded at with my my punk band back in early 2000s, and he had the same system where you would just put your amps into like a kind of a closet,
right?
And you'd all be obviously headphoned up, and but you were playing live still,
sure.
And so you got that energy, and that's definitely the energy that he created within our recording. And so did the guy that recorded my other band In the Wake Of was that band.
Okay.
And so I just dug that vibe immediately. I remember I kind of.
And you're a Pinellas guy, right? You're over that.
No, actually, I live downtown, like right near downtown. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, Tampa.
Yeah, no, I got the chance to go over to Rock Garden and watch when Wolfface, they were doing a promo for this Liquid Death water. Okay. So I got to watch them playing there, and he's been on the show too, and he built that studio, like every friggin' inch of it. And one of my bands that I've just always been a big fan of is Mastodon, and Troy, the lead singer and bass player for Mastodon, he lives out like Indian Rocks Beach.
Oh, nice.
And he records. He's on all these different bands now, and but he like does a lot of his vocal stuff with Dan over there.
That's great.
So it's badass. Now, did you do a vinyl pressing of any of those? So they're all streaming.
Yeah, they're all streaming. Actually, funnily enough, as I was coming over here, I was texting a buddy of mine I know who just pressed one of his records from an old band, just for himself and maybe a couple of friends, kind of thing. And I'm thinking I might want to do that with High Beam.
I wish there was a way. So, I know that you're friends with Keith too, over at Microgrid. And there's bands, there's people that they've come in, I've talked to him. I was like, God, I'd love to have you have an album come out. And I'd go to Keith and I was like, what's the cheapest way I could? He's like, there's no cheapest way to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to pay $5,000 for however many records. You're going to sell 3 of them. And then you're going to have boxes of the rest in the back that you're never going to be able to get rid of.
Yeah. That's why you have some of those records. Right
well,
there.
but I'll take it. I mean, I've gotten really, he's got that bin over the side with all the local bands, man. I've got pretty much all of those in there. I'm trying to get I don't know if you're familiar with Yoshira from up in Jacksonville.
A little bit.
They just put out an album this year, and Elliot will tell you it's fucking insane. It's one of the best albums of 2020.
Okay.
So
I should check it out.
Yoshira, yeah. Anyway, where was I going with that? Local bands pressing high beam, vinyl. I don't know how to crack the code, but I wish they made it affordable somehow. But he's like, either you cut one by hand each time and you can make a smaller run, but it takes the amount of time it takes to listen to it to cut it.
Yeah.
And it's just fucking retarded to do it that way. Or no press is going to spend the time or money on you unless you buy. With COVID, have you been writing? Has your creative senses been tingling?
Oh yeah. I have a ton of stuff. Who knows where it'll end up. I was actually kind of writing a little bit with one of the keyboardists from Macramé Owls.
Okay.
And I thought we had a really cool song, and he wrote some really cool vocals and recorded over it. And then it just never kind of came to fruition, you know?
Well, it's hard because you can't get that momentum like you can get normally where it's like, okay, let's go play this somewhere. Or let's go, record this somewhere. It's just like everything's so clunky because of just everything being shut down. Yeah.
So I've recorded a bunch of stuff on GarageBand on my own, and we'll see if maybe later down the line it'll become songs for High Beam, whatever, So
did you ever do a solo type deal?
Not really, because I can't sing. So it's kind of, unless I want to do an instrumental, But I mean, still, even that's hard to do, I mean, I'm a big post rock fan as well, but, it's hard to do on your own kind of thing. So
Buzz Osborne from the Melvins, he's been going around doing a solo, like acoustic version of a lot of his stuff. And I found that to be pretty fun because listening to acoustic Melvins is pretty cool. It's different, but it's cool.
Oh yeah.
What about playing live? Did any of these bands get to? I mean, was High Beam touring much? Were they?
We didn't tour, but we had some really good opportunities locally playing. And I guess the furthest we got, we played Sarasota.
Yeah.
They have a pretty decent scene down there.
Yeah, for sure.
Played at Gators.
Have Gun Will Travel and some of those guys from down that way. Yeah.
I don't know the guys, but I know,
that's their neck of the woods.
Yeah.
What professionally, what do you do?
So I'm actually a government contractor, work over at the base.
Do you work with Dimitri too?
I don't actually.
Okay.
We're two different sides. I work Yes, I work at a university that's part of the military for the special ops guys on the base. And I do actually video work and I do voiceovers for the university. So like curriculum, things like that. I will voice a lot of the courseware that they want.
It's funny. You can't sing, but you do all this voiceover stuff. It's like I can talk it, but I can't sing it.
Exactly. I do all that. Videos for professors. If they want to kind of have a commercial to talk about what we're going to be doing at the university. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming in. I always love having musicians on, and yours is definitely a band that I've enjoyed since Dimitri introduced me to it. I think we have such a rich scene here, and I am hoping that with COVID that people kind of go more towards local music because, they're not going to have those national acts that they have touring around here anymore. So
totally.
Once the touring scene opens up, hopefully I can catch you guys live at some point.
Same, man. Yeah. I hope it opens up soon.
Well,
actually wearing the shirt from the last show I saw, which is Corridor. They played at Hooch and Hive with another band called Deeper. And
oh wow.
I think it was the same night as Gasparilla Music Fest. Was the last night.
That was my last show. Was Gasparilla Music Fest.
I went there Saturday, and then Sunday I went to this show at Hooch and Hive, and it was awesome. But I didn't realize it was going to be my swan song for quite some time.
For sure, yeah. There was a show this weekend at Crowbar I wanted to go to, but it was my son's birthday. But it's hard because even if you can go see live music, it's not the same vibe. I was trying to I was supposed to throw a show on December 12th at Crowbar. Tom was going to give me space to have all the bands who had been on during the first year of the show to play. But most of them, just because what I listen to are heavier, harder, punky, hardcore, that sort of stuff. And it's like, how do you sit down at a table and watch that? You know,
Yeah.
I would still do it because I want to see live music, but
Totally.
you lose a part of the whole experience there.
I completely agree.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming in. I
you
wish
for
you the
having me.
best of luck. I can't wait to hear whatever new material. Hopefully, if you put anything out this year, you'll come back on and we can talk about it.
100%. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for your Rage Against the Machine poster. As I said, if you ever decide you want it back, I'll give it to you.
All right. Awesome.